Yeah,
and
and it's all due to inflammation.
right.
1 out of every 5 now is being diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder, and the list of autoimmune disorders keeps growing. So basically, what they do is every time you've got a symptom, they put a name to it, so then they can put a diagnosis code to it.
Right.
And so, really getting to the root, I mean, all these autoimmune disorders are so similarly kind of rooted in the fact that you've got to take care of the inflammation that's going on in your body. And so, taking a look at why your body is so inflamed or angry, if you will,
Right.
is really important.
Welcome to the Natural Health Matters podcast, where it's all about maximizing your health potential so that you can look and feel your best at any age. I'm your host, David Sandstrom, naturopathic doctor and biblical health coach, and this is episode number 115. If you or someone you know has ever suffered from a mysterious health challenge and you are unable to find help from even several doctors because they didn't have a pill that would fix you, stick around. This episode is for you. Pamela Wirth has a son who was suffering from a number of mysterious health challenges, and she finally found help by not trying to go after symptoms, but find the root cause. Today she has a healthy teenager. I think you're going to enjoy this episode. So let's jump right into my conversation with Pamela Wirth. Today we have on the show Pamela Wirth. Pamela is the host of the Encouraging Wellness podcast. She's also the founder of Hello Health, a supplement company that believes in empowering moms and caregivers to pursue health with natural and holistic wellness solutions. Pamela, welcome to Natural Health Matters.
Thank you. Hi, David.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you on. I know I've been looking forward to this conversation. You have a real inspirational story. So why don't you just give us the 35,000-foot view of what it is you're doing today, and then we'll get into how you got to that point.
Yeah, you bet. So at this point, what we have is a supplement company as well as increasing library of research and a podcast called Encouraging Wellness, where we're bringing people on and talking about different integrative and functional ways that they healed, both practitioners as well as people.
Excellent. So you're building a community and you're providing resources for people that are like-minded. Yeah, I
Yeah,
love
for
it.
sure.
Yeah,
It's tough to find out there. So
really
I
good
mean, the only
stuff.
reason I'm doing this is because I couldn't find it myself. So
Yeah, well, I felt the same way when I wrote my book. I was looking for a book on holistic health from a Christian biblical perspective, and I couldn't find
mhm.
one. So I wrote it,
Yeah,
and it's been a blessing, and I think a lot of people have been blessed by it. It's really cool. It's called The Christian's Guide to Holistic Health. And yeah, that was kind of my story on why I decided to write the book. I said, this book needs to be written because this is a message that people will really resonate with. So, anyway, it's on Amazon, but I'd like to see it get the message out to even more people. But you have an inspiring story with your son Ryan on his health challenges. So let's talk about that and how that all led you into doing what you do today.
yeah, of course. So my day-to-day background is operations technology for both private and public companies, from a CEO down to a COO to a consultant level across a variety of industries. So the point of mentioning that is that I'm a problem solver by nature, but I had no intention of ever creating a health company. So what happened was I've got two now healthy teenage boys, but at the time, one of them at the age around 5.5 to 6 went from this perfectly normal little boy to baby talking, crawling, eyes constantly dilated, devoid of all emotion. Um, he had really weird like neck and shoulder shrugs and eye tics. Um, and he would wash his hands 30, 40 times a day and only enter and exit rooms in a certain manner. And he would hide. It was horrific. And it all happened over a period of a few weeks. So it felt like something that happened fairly overnight, even though it was a few weeks.
So he didn't
Um,
exhibit any of those symptoms up to this point.
no, no,
Wow.
gosh, no, no.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was diagnosed with Tourette's, with OCD, with anxiety, with depression, um, autism, and then ultimately with a brain autoimmune disorder. And leading up to this, we would see 3 doctors, over a week or two period. And so we were on to our like ninth or 10th doctor when finally I found one that was a neurologist um, from Asia originally, educated at UCLA. And she says, hey, I need to pull some blood work on him and find out what's going on inside. And I'm like, my gosh, like that actually makes sense to me, using the data to get to what might be going on rather than, because I mean, up to this point, they said things like kids will be kids. Let's put him on some Prozac. He seems really depressed. Well, of course he's depressed. Like, no, that doesn't necessarily solve, why he's depressed. Um,
Right.
the children's hospital wanted to check him in for observation for a couple of weeks. I'm like, no, no, you can't have my little 6-year-old.
Mm.
And so finally found this doctor, and so the data then came back. And so at this point, we're really scared. We've been reaching out through private Facebook groups, seeking help, which is how we found this doctor. Um, and so then the blood work showed he was low in certain vitamin levels like vitamin B12, D3. He had a genetic marker called MTHFR, which is very, very prevalent. It's in about half the population. And you can
Right.
easily solve it by taking methylfolate and removing things like folic acid and non-methylated vitamins. He also had a viral infection called CMV, which is fairly common among school-age kids. Not a big deal for most kids. It's a fever and a cough and a runny nose. And then he also had high strep titers in his blood, suggesting an active strep infection, even though he was negative for strep throat. So that
Mm.
was kind of new news to me that you can have strep without having it in your throat. And so the long story short, all of these things, she said, created this perfect storm, and his immune system's not working properly. The infection has crossed the blood-brain barrier and is now causing motor, vocal, and mood challenges and disorders. And so I
Wow.
was like, all right, so now what? She goes, well, I can cure him. And I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, great. She goes, the hard part is it's going to take about a year. This is all a very complicated puzzle, and we're going to hit, issue by issue, some of them simultaneously, some of them, in a certain order. And we have to fix his gut was the last thing she said. And I was like, okay, I have no idea what you're talking about. This is years ago. And she said, look, there's about 15 probiotics that have to be in the gut every single day for the gut brain axis to work properly. They really need a foundation of 2 prebiotics on a daily basis that prevent negative overgrowth of bacteria. And I was
Hmm.
like, all right. She goes, and then that's not really enough. You're not only putting the good stuff in, but you've got to help the body detox the bad stuff out. And I was like, all right, so like what? She goes, well, like olive leaf extract for viruses, oregano for bacteria, cinnamon for fungi,
Hmm.
turmeric, boswellia, which is frankincense. There's a reason why it was in the Bible, and so, all these things are really antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and just help the body get back to a normal state, but it takes time.
Hmm.
And sure enough, about a year passed, and then he popped back, and he hasn't left us since. So, I sat on this for a few years, and then I just, I had this nagging feeling. So I ended up writing the book along with 3 doctors and 2 other families, and then I started the supplement company, kind of believing that because I possess these skills of problem solving, and I know how to build and run companies, and I know how to get messages across, that it wouldn't be easy, but I felt like it happened to me for a reason, and I had to do something about that.
Yeah.
So
And what's the
that's
title
kind of
of your
where we're at
first book?
today.
You have 2 books, right? What's the title of the first one?
Yeah, yeah. The first one is Hello Health, and then the second one will be coming out in early 2023 called Saving My Son.
Okay. All right, great. And they'll be available on Amazon?
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
I'll make sure to put links in the show notes for those 2 books for sure.
Oh, thanks.
So I'm curious. So this must have been a pretty scary time for you. So
Oh, it's terrible.
you did what most moms would do, is go to the doctor, and then when you don't get any answers, you go to the next one and go to the next one, and then you
Mhm.
finally kind of stumbled upon a doctor that was functional. So I'm assuming it was a functional practitioner that you ended up with.
Well, she didn't say it at that point because a lot of doctors get a lot of flack, not only from inside the industry, but outside due to lack of education and lack of knowledge. And so,
Yeah.
absolutely, she is,
Hmm.
but didn't necessarily advertise herself that way.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, well, they have to work within the confines of their license and their licensing boards, otherwise they're going to get in trouble. But
Yeah.
yeah, so as opposed to just looking at the symptoms and say, I'm going to give you let's pop some pills to deal with the symptoms. This doc said, hey, no, let's try to find the root. Let's figure out why. If you had a perfectly normal child up to this point, what changed? What's different?
Yeah.
Right. So you got to
Yeah.
put your detective hat on, and sounds like she did. And you ran a bunch of labs. I'm curious as to what caused her to look for strep in the blood. Is that they found it in the blood?
Yeah, she said it's very, very common and very much undiagnosed. That strep is a huge problem in children, but it really
Okay.
goes undiagnosed, and it gets treated differently in terms of most get treated for anxiety, depression,
Yeah.
gut issues.
Hmm.
Um, and then it's the statistics are that it's affecting more than 1 in every 150 children.
Yeah. Which is just staggering, right? I
Yeah, it's
mean,
crazy.
that's just crazy. Another common infection that goes undiagnosed is Lyme disease. Was he ever
Hmm.
tested for Lyme?
Yeah, and he came back negative for Lyme, so we tested
Okay.
for that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Okay.
tested for EBV, mycoplasma, CMV, strep, um, coxsackie, something or another. Anyway, there was a lot that we tested for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So one by one, you started cutting down trees,
Hmm.
and you saw him improving.
Yeah, and
And
then to follow up on that, though, I said, look, it's really important to me that we know that we're going in the right direction, and so we did quarterly blood draws to make sure that the numbers were in fact going in the right direction, which they
uh huh.
were. Um, it would really, really be nice if we could find alternatives for this through saliva and through urine because getting blood work is painful and expensive and
Right.
traumatic and
Yeah. Well, I know
um,
some practitioners will use blood work. They'll use saliva when they can. Maybe use stool samples, also
mhm,
urinalysis. So there's a lot of different ways to look at some of those markers. But usually, more than one is the most thorough way to do it because they all have
mhm,
their limitations and their advantages. Saliva is really easy for hormones, but it might not be the most accurate representation of what's going on inside the body. So,
yeah.
so how long did it take before you said, "Hey, this is working. This is encouraging."
Um, we first started with adding back some of the vitamin levels, and so you you don't necessarily see anything dramatically different when you start taking your supplements. And so we added in things like the fish omega pill, the probiotics, the prebiotics, the D3, the B12, the methylfolate, and so those things were very important in terms of building a foundation, but you didn't necessarily see a difference there
Hmm.
unless you pulled the blood work and then you saw that things were starting to increase. Um, and then we started to treat the infection, and so we did an antiviral for a week, and and then we did different antibiotics and different combinations, and it was interesting because eventually I was doing a lot of research and talking to other doctors, and I said, so if I'm strep, where am I hiding? And they said, well, it tends to hide, in the tonsils, the adenoids, the heart. And I was like, all right, so what if we pull the tonsils? And they said, well, his tonsils are healthy looking. And he had
Hmm.
and his adenoids, interestingly enough, he had a lot of ear infections as a kid. I mean, all these things are very hereditary. If you're not sure if you have MTHFR, just take a look at your family history. And you have a history of ear infections and eczema and um, heart disease and stroke and all these things. So anyway, he had a lot of ear infections.
Hmm.
And so he had ear tubes put in. And when we did that, they burned out his adenoids. Well, anyway, consequently, the adenoids had grown back because they can do that.
Yeah.
So I said, well, look, why don't we pull the tonsils and the adenoids? This was about a year in. And they said, that's not really necessary. And I said, yeah, but it just makes me feel better. So we did that. And then I had them biopsy the tonsils. And they said, well, that costs extra and whatever. And I said, I don't care. I want to know what's in there.
Hmm.
And so the ENT comes back. This guy's in his late 60s at this point, and his face is just ashen. And I said, what's going on? And he goes, I have never, ever in the entire, I think he had said he'd been practicing for 40 years or something, seen this type of strep in someone's tonsils. And he said, we have
Wow.
to immediately put him on rifampin, which is kind of one of the end of the line um, antibiotics. So all that time of antibiotics treating the strep, it never actually killed the strep because the strep would then just go back and hide in the tonsils until it passed. I mean, it's a
Hmm.
living organism, right?
Yeah.
And so we had finally gotten it, and so that was important. So it was, and then when we started the oregano, olive leaf extract, the frankincense, the turmeric, that's when we noticed started to see a dramatic difference within 6 weeks.
Hmm.
So it does take time. I really, really like leaning on data, whether it's professionally or personally, and so that's where that lab work I think is so important, and that's where I'm looking to find partners that can come up with easier ways to really do this in the privacy of your own home.
Yeah.
Um, because I think that's so important.
Yeah, there are more and more labs that are doing that these days, where they send labs to your house, and you can even do a blood draw at your house and send it
Hmm.
in, and you can skip the doctor's office, but of course consult with the doctor or the
Oh, of
practitioner.
course.
But it's a lot more convenient that way. So you mentioned MTHFR, and it's a SNP. It stands
Yeah.
for single nucleotide polymorphism, and we do inherit those. They are genetic, and we inherit those. But just because you have it doesn't mean that that's a life sentence, right? Yeah, I mean,
No, no,
it
not
just
even.
means that you have a weakness, right?
Mhm.
And lifestyle has far more influence over our health outcomes than our genes do. So, I just wanted to put that out there, and that, there's this notion out there that there's a genetic destiny that everyone has. And,
Mm-mm.
it's just everything depends on that one lucky roll of the genetic dice. When that's just simply not true. Lifestyle has
Yeah.
far more influence on our health outcomes. And I'm sure that you took that approach and you said, okay, let's compensate for this weakness and let's do what we can do to see about turning this boy's health around. And
Yeah.
obviously you were successful. So how's he doing today?
He's amazing. He's a straight A student, elite athlete, thriving teenager, and so he's doing great. And I will say, absolutely. I think a lot of us have this genetic makeup, but there's certain things that come into our life that may act as a trigger. But I think if you put the right ingredients back into your body, that your body will heal itself. And so, but to do that, you've really got to take a look at what you're doing in your environment and with your nutrition in terms of, am I having an inflammatory diet or anti-inflammatory diet,
Mm-hmm.
back on those sugars, simple carbohydrates, and then making sure that your environment is as detox friendly as possible, or at least helping your body detox in a really efficient manner.
Right.
Um,
So get the good in and get the bad out, right?
yeah, a lot of people struggle with heavy metals. That was
Mm-hmm.
something that we tested for, and thankfully that was not the case. But a lot of people do have some really serious health challenges, and they come up with
Yeah.
high levels of heavy metals too. So that's another thing.
So speaking of heavy metals, does he or did he have mercury amalgam fillings?
No, never did.
Never did. Okay. And
No,
then did you vaccinate him? I know it's kind of a personal
I
question. You
did.
don't. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I did for sure. And a lot of people said, well, don't you think? And I said, no, because at the age of 5.5, 6, there's not anywhere during that year period that there's a vaccination that would have been the trigger here. So I
Okay.
truly think it was the viral infection, the bacterial
Yeah.
infection that acted as that trigger.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, I was that mom that was caving into the chicken fingers, the mac and cheese, the carb loading. And
Yeah.
we dramatically changed and brought in more fruits and vegetables and protein. And
Let's talk about that. So I mean, every 5, 6 year old loves chicken nuggets, right? They love the
oh yeah.
drive-through. They love French fries, chicken nuggets. So how did you overcome that? How did you say, hey, this is okay once in a while, but we're not going to be living this way anymore? How did he take it, and how did you handle it?
He didn't love that idea, but at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
thankfully at that age, they don't have a lot of say around all this, and you do as the
Yeah.
parent. And yes, the temper tantrums are terrible, but they're far worse as the kid gets older. And it's
Yeah.
better to just deal with temper tantrums, and they're fairly short-lived once you figure out how to make some interesting food yourself. And it was more work for me. It required me to do more meal prep over the weekends.
Yeah.
Um, but I got used to it, and we just kind of, and now it's kind of gotten to a point where, it's kind of like folding laundry. It's annoying, but by the same token, it's just kind of mind clearing at the same time while you're chopping or,
Yeah.
getting stuff ready. And, there's a lot of things that can be done where you can just make it and put it in the freezer and then pull it out the day before or the day of while it's in the fridge and then pop it in the oven or whatever else. So,
Mm-hmm. So
um,
before you started on this journey, I'm assuming you pretty much had the SAD diet, the standard American diet that most of us did
yeah.
when we were kids, and you made some changes. I'm assuming you made them gradually, or did you kind of just make one fell swoop? Let's clean out the cupboard,
it,
and
it was abrupt. It was
it
abrupt.
was okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you were really motivated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I mean, it was time. Who got the hardest brunt of it was his brother. His brother's
yeah.
like, whoa, 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 I'm healthy. And I'm like, no, you have ADD. We're going to take care of that too.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, the best time to address your health is when you're healthy, right? It's a
yeah.
lot easier to maintain your health than it is to recover your health.
Yeah.
So, yeah, hats off to you for doing that. So, let's talk some more specifics about what dietary changes you made. So, you started eating more fruits and vegetables, more natural foods, whole foods. So, what did that look like? I mean, what did a typical
Well,
day look like for you?
yeah. So it's really hard to get enough fruits and vegetables down a child,
Hmm.
period. End of story, let
Hmm.
alone yourself. So I went ahead and I made the investment in the Vitamix. And
Hmm.
then literally it will it'll blend anything up for you. And
Right.
if your family is tolerant, adding things like a banana or some peanut butter or some almond butter or something, I mean, it can hide the taste and the everything else that kind of goes in there. So I,
Yeah.
I, I definitely am a big believer in the smoothies.
Hmm.
And then, we did more, I called it mommy meatloaf because I would grind up a bunch of stuff and then I'd throw it in there with the ground turkey. Um, so at least get that in there. And now,
Uh-huh.
they don't mind any of that stuff, but at the time it was like, eh.
Yeah.
Um, and then,
Uh-huh.
the chicken breast, you can cut it up into strips and then almost make your own, chicken strips, if you will, by kind of dredging it, and that's pretty tasty.
Hmm.
And then if you get ground turkey, you can actually make some pretty yummy chicken patties too, and you can add in some sweet potato and things like that. That sounds weird, but it's delicious.
No, that sounds good actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, do you offer some of the resources like recipes and whatnot do you have a Facebook group, or what kind of a community is it?
Yeah, so growing the Facebook community and then also growing out more of an online. It's currently in the process of being built off of Facebook so that folks can log in and really share with each other. One of the things that kind of worries me in retrospect was that I leaned in so hard into a private Facebook, well, several private Facebook groups and sharing a lot of really confidential things. And now knowing what happens to that data, it worries me.
Mm,
So what I want to finish building out is this community where people can actually share, stories and help each other without, worrying about the data being sold. So that's something
yeah.
that's currently in the mix.
Okay. Wow, that's
Yeah.
exciting. Yeah, this privacy is a big deal these days, isn't it?
Yeah, it's scary. And without, I mean, and I'm still so grateful to all these people that were so kind and helpful as I was going through such a scary time. And without them, I never would have gotten through.
Hmm.
But I worry about some of the after effects that I may have done. But
Yeah. So, what was it that something inside of you that said, "Hey, I'm not just going to roll over and accept this diagnosis. I'm not going to put him on Prozac. I'm not going to accept the idea that my kid is just autistic and he was born that way, because I know he wasn't." So, what gave you the courage? What was the difference for you to keep pursuing, looking for answers? What made the difference?
oh, I was just scared to death. And I didn't know if I was making the right decision or not. But I just kept trusting that there's got to be a different reason why. And
Hmm.
it's interesting. So many doctors treat things so differently. Um, and then I would talk to parents and families in these private Facebook groups that had gone down certain roads. And I'd say, so tell me a little bit about what that journey looked like and how are they now? And it just never really felt like the place where I wanted things to end up. Nothing felt permanent. Nothing felt okay. It always felt like pins and needles. And you live like that for long enough and you get used to it, but it's way too stressful.
Hmm. Did you ever test your son for food sensitivities?
Oh yeah. Yeah. We did all that.
Yeah. What'd you
He
find
came
out?
back
What did you discover?
not sensitive for anything. But I did take him off gluten for a year and I took him off
Hmm.
dairy for about 6 months, just because they are
Okay.
inflammatory in nature and it can't hurt.
Yes.
Um, so, but then we added some of it back in. Like when we're out and about in restaurants and stuff, he'll eat gluten now and he's fine.
Hmm.
But in terms of at home, I try and keep things as clean as possible. And so we
Yeah.
lean more into potatoes and rice and stuff, which is still, it's not necessarily a great idea, but I think it's probably better than. I mean, I was raised, on bread and butter every meal and
Hmm.
um, Costco and everything else. Nothing
Yeah.
against Costco, but just trying not to lean too hard into the processed stuff.
Yeah. Well, Costco these days does have a fair selection of organic. You
Yeah.
got to wonder, a lot of the organic does come from China.
Mm,
And China is pretty well known for their cheating and copying and those kinds of things. So you got to wonder
yeah.
how valuable the organic certification is, something from China. But I think there actually, my opinion is the USDA does a pretty decent job of
Hmm.
regulating that.
Hmm.
There's always corrupt people in every organization, and I'm sure there is at USDA. But I think for the most part, they do a very good job, and there are some pretty stiff penalties for getting caught. And if you're going to build a brand around being organic, you sure don't want to be the one that's making headlines for the wrong reason, and
No,
getting
you sure
fined.
don't.
So yeah, being eating organic is a huge step in the right direction. And yeah, I totally agree that if
Yeah.
if you want to address food, eliminating gluten and dairy for a period of time is a good choice. And when I have my office, people say, "You mean I can't eat bread ever again?" No, that's not true.
Yeah.
When you eliminate, you will cool down the inflammation, which is a very
Yeah.
good thing.
Yeah.
And as you were doing the prebiotics, the probiotics, the other herbal supplements that you were doing, the turmeric, I think you said, and then the
Hmm.
oregano
Boswellia is
and
huge.
Oswellia. Yeah, all of those will contribute to better gut health. And as your gut heals, then you're more able to tolerate those less than ideal foods, right?
Hmm.
Wheat and dairy both have a lot of nutrients in them.
Hmm.
So you'd like to be able to eat them at least once in a while for the nutritional value. But while you're recovering, especially in the early stages, not a
Yeah.
bad idea at all to eliminate.
Yeah. And then when it comes to dairies and meats, I really strongly believe it's paying that extra dollar or two for the organic just because of the
Yeah,
pesticides, and the
the
hormones.
hormones.
Yeah, those are
Yep.
so scary. And it really, the kids are going through puberty earlier and earlier. And as you
Yep.
can, they're saying that, your risk for certain health disorders later in life, can be mitigated the longer, you can push out, um, going
Hmm.
through puberty. So I think
Yeah.
that's important.
Well, it's my contention that we should eat food as close to its God-given natural form as possible.
Hmm.
The more man gets his hands on our food supply, the worse it is for us.
Yeah.
So if it comes through a window or it's in a box or a package, it's suspect.
Yeah, that's true.
The way to go is buy from a trusted farmer that or a farmer's market, or buy single ingredient organic foods
Hmm.
at the grocery store,
Hmm.
and that's the best way to go. You want some cauliflower, then buy cauliflower.
Yeah.
You want an apple, then buy an apple. Don't buy an apple roll.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
A fruit treat.
yeah, you don't know what went into that apple roll.
No.
So the more natural it is, the better it is. And God never designed our dairy to be full of hormones that fatten the cows up and cause them to produce 2, 3, 4, 5 times as much dairy as a cow would naturally produce. More profitable, sure.
Hmm.
More healthy, no. No, it's definitely detrimental. So it's a pretty good rule of thumb. And another rule of thumb I like to throw out there is buy food that spoils and eat it before it does.
Hmm.
It's another good rule of thumb.
I like that.
Yeah. So, Pamela, do you have any other low-hanging fruit that you'd like to share with the audience that someone might be struggling and that they
Yeah.
could start implementing right away?
You know, the reason I created the supplement company was because of its supplements that taught me how to make it home. And I had folks that were just kind of blown away by the healing of our son. And so I said, well, and they asked if they could buy them from me. And I'm like, no, not at my house. No. So then I kind of went down this whole thing of formulators and manufacturing and
Hmm.
certifications and making sure everything is great. And so we take them as a family today. Um,
Hmm.
and as I was going through and I was creating these, I had a lot of folks telling me that I should do it in the form of gummies because they're just more fun. And I said, no, but then they're full of sugar, and that kind of is counter productive to what
Right.
it is we're trying
Right.
to do. Um, and then I had a lot of folks say, why don't you do a liquid? And I said, but the hard part with liquids is it's messy and it can spill and you're not sure if you're getting the right dosage or whatever. So we ended up doing heat resistant vegetarian capsules, and then found the most bioavailable ingredients there. Everything's made in the US. Everything is from the US, sourced in the US, except for turmeric and boswellia, which is from India, and then organic olive leaf, which is from France. Um, just because you buy supplements doesn't necessarily mean that they're not made from unideal ingredients or in an unideal country. So
Yeah.
just buying supplements based on cost can be dangerous. And so really do the research in terms of the company and why they're in business, um, and really thinking carefully about that. And then we are going to be launching a liquid line just because there is so much demand. But the hard part now is we're currently going through flavorings because I don't want to add sugar. And so, how do you make
Hmm.
something taste acceptable without it being loaded with sugar? And so, taking a look at different lemon or lime or berry options. So,
Okay.
just really watching that sugar content is so important. It really screws up the gut. I mean,
Right.
imagine that you've got as many outside bacteria and viruses in your body as you do cells, and it's you've got your own ecosystem going on here. And the bad guys like to eat a lot of sugar, and then they out. It's like the good versus the evil, and then the bad guys outweigh the good, and
Right.
so limit the stuff that really can take things out of whack in your body, and that really.
Yeah. Well, the gut health is so foundational. You mentioned that, it causes mental emotional issues. It causes mood problems. It causes concentration problems, sleep problems. And then when your gut is unhealthy, becoming inflamed, it's porous. So you are passing large food particles through there when they should be digested further before they make it their way into the bloodstream. So
Yeah.
once you have these food particles, causing inflammation systemically throughout the body, now you're introducing all kinds of that can express itself in all kinds of health challenges, and you can get diagnosed with all kinds of things, everything from MS to fibromyalgia, and the root is you have an unhealthy gut,
Yeah,
and
and it's all due to inflammation.
right,
One out of every five now is being diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder, and the list of autoimmune disorders keeps growing. So basically, what they do is every time you've got a symptom, they put a name to it, so then they can put a diagnosis code to it.
right,
And so, really getting to the root, I mean, all these autoimmune disorders are so similarly kind of rooted in the fact that you've got to take care of the inflammation that's going on in your body. And so, taking a look at why your body is so inflamed or angry, if you will,
right,
is really important. And
right.
similarly with autism, some of these folks that are on, I'm not saying that there isn't a hard and fast diagnosis for autism, but a lot of these ones that are on the spectrum, it's truly a puzzle that you're trying to figure out what pieces might be able to be positively impacted to minimize some of the symptoms that are being experienced. So,
Hmm.
um, it's scary and hard, but important to kind of
Yeah.
keep that journey.
When you eliminated gluten, did you use some gluten substitutes or did you just eliminate grains altogether?
Um, we when I first went hard and fast and took all the gluten out of the house, I immediately started substituting gluten free just so that the folks didn't feel like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? So,
Yeah.
um, and then started to peel back, as much of the carb loading, even gluten free as you could, because, not all gluten free is good for you either.
Right.
Um,
Hmm.
so
Yeah. So
you have to take a look at the number of ingredients in there, right?
did you explore anything? You mentioned non-toxic home. Did you explore anything like Wi-Fi and cell phone exposure and other toxins in the home?
Yeah. So, and I even went a little step further than that, which may sound a little crazy to some folks, but we lived in an area, a nice part of Scottsdale, Arizona, but it was under a landing zone of the Scottsdale Airport, which is one of the busiest private airports in the country.
Uh-huh.
And come to find out that those planes are allowed to put off leaded fuel. So we ended up, and then that house was close. It was within 2 miles of a freeway, and it was close to power lines, major
Mm.
power lines.
Oh, that's a
So
huge health
ended up,
hazard. Yeah.
um, yeah, no, which is terrible. It's just amazing that that's all allowed.
Hmm.
Um, so ended up moving to a home. We pulled out all the carpet because carpet can put off toxins. Just put down
Hmm.
tile, and then made sure that it was at least a mile away from a major power line, at least 2.5 miles away from the freeway, and then we are nowhere close to landing or taking off zone of the airport. So,
Nice.
um, yeah, it's just,
Good for
and I
you. So
did
that
take
was
a
a lot
look
of
at
work.
where yeah, and then I did take a look at where the power comes into the house to make sure it didn't share any walls of any bedrooms.
Hmm.
It shares with the garage, so that's good. Yeah, no, about all this stuff. I mean, it
Yeah.
really is a
Yeah, really good.
really
One of
is a
the things that
challenge.
people don't think about, I had a guest on not too long ago. I can think of his name here. I'll share with you. But he was a EMF guy, electromagnetic frequencies,
Hmm.
and he said, you ought to call your power company and find out if they put a wireless meter in your house, because
Mm,
that is like having a cell tower in your house. It's constantly broadcasting to the home base, and that's a powerful signal that you don't want to expose yourself to on a daily basis. So I called up power company after that interview. Sure enough, they said, "Oh yeah, you're wireless." I'm like, "Well, I'd like to change that back to the analog meter." They're like, "Well, we can do that. It's going to be
wow.
$18 a month." I said, "Well, that's what I want." So that's what we did. And the meter is out right outside our bedroom wall, right where my head rests.
Mm,
And
no.
once we changed that, I felt as though I was sleeping better. So, those are invisible hazards that really, especially if you're dealing with a serious health challenge, that should be addressed. They can make
Yeah,
they
I
can make
mean,
a big
it's
difference.
impossible to take away all the inflammatory causes, but
Right.
trying to chip away at what you can is
Right.
really important.
You can eliminate it. When you walk into any place of business these days, there's going to be Wi-Fi, there's going to be
Hmm.
formaldehyde, there's going to be lead, there's
Yeah.
going to be all kinds of things. But at least in where you spend most of your time, your home, do what you
Hmm.
can.
Yeah.
Again, it's easier to keep up than it is to catch up. So,
Hmm.
prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yeah. Isn't that the truth?
Yeah. Well, any closing thoughts, Pamela, that you'd like to share with the audience before we close this out?
No, I'm just so appreciative to share the message. I hope it provides some inspiration to others to kind of take a look at their own life and see how they can, really help ramp up their own health and their family's health. Continue to ask questions, continue to push for answers, continue to seek out a number of different types of practitioners. If you're going through something, don't just put up with what the first five or six say if it just doesn't feel right.
Hmm.
And, continue to have that courage to keep on going.
Yeah, that's great. So if someone would like to get a hold of you, what's the easiest way to do that, Pamela?
Yeah, my email address is pamela@hello.health. That's Pamela. The website is www.hello.health. And would love to connect on Instagram or Facebook as well. So thank you. I really appreciate your time.
Excellent. Thank you for your time, Pamela. I really appreciate it. For more, go to the show notes page at davidsandstrom.com/115. There you can find a video as well as an audio version of the podcast. And I always put links to all the resources that we mentioned. And there's also a free downloadable transcript. And I also put some kind of a content upgrade on every episode to help you go deeper with that subject. If you're enjoying the podcast, I sure would appreciate you sharing it with a friend. The number one way people discover a podcast is someone tells them about it. So help me get the word out there and spread the word and tell your friends about this show. Thanks for listening. I'll talk with you next time. Be blessed.